A Voice from Waterloo is the humble tale of an old soldier who was an eyewitness to and participant in many of the scenes he attempts to describe. Edward Cotton served in the 7th Hussars. Let's begin. Having resided more than 14 years on the field, as a guide and describer of the battle, may be considered the parent of the present memoirs. Brussels was our main line of operations and the line of communication with Ostend and Antwerp, the depots where our reinforcements and supplies were landed. The Duke, consequently, saw clearly that it was of the utmost importance, both in a military and political point of view, to preserve an uninterrupted communication with those ports and that the enemy should not, even for a moment, obtain possession of Brussels. By the Emperor's masterly arrangements, his army was assembled on the frontiers with astonishing secrecy, but his intention of taking the two armies by surprise was defeated on the night of the 13th by the Prussian outposts, in advance of Charleroi, having observed the horizon illumined by the reflection of numerous bivouac fires in the direction of Beaumont and Maubeuge, which announced that a numerous enemy had assembled in their immediate front. This intelligence was forthwith transmitted to both Wellington and Blucher. Zieten, the Prussian commander at Charleroi, received intelligence on the afternoon of the 14th that the enemy's columns were assembling in his front, the certain prelude to an attack, probably the next day. Blucher, apprised of this about 10 o'clock the same evening, immediately sent off orders for the concentration of the Prussian army at Fleurus, a preconcerted plan between the two commanders. When the order was first sent to Bülow at Liège to move to Anu, had the most trifling hint been given him of the French being about to attack, he would probably have been up in time to share in the Battle of Ligny, which might have changed the aspect of affairs. After dispatching orders for the concentration of the Grand Army, Napoleon left Paris on the 12th and, as he himself states, under a great depression of spirits, aware he was leaving a host of enemies behind, more formidable than those he was going to confront. He slept at Laon and arrived at Avanes on the 13th, near which place he found his army assembled, amounting, according to his own account, to 122,400 men and 350 guns. Their bivouacs were behind small hills, about a league from the frontier, situated so as to be concealed, in a great measure, from the view of their opponents. The Emperor's arrival amongst his devoted soldiers raised their spirits to the highest degree of enthusiasm, and on the 14th he issued the following order. Imperial Headquarters, 14th of June, 1815. Napoleon, by the grace of God and the Constitution of the Empire, Emperor of the French, etc. soldiers. This day is the anniversary of Marengo and of Friedland, which twice decided the fate of Europe. Then, as after Austerlitz, as after Wagram, we were too generous, we believed in the protestations and in the oaths of princes, whom we left on their thrones. Now, however, leagued together, they aim at the independence and most sacred rights of France, they have commenced the most unjust of aggressions. Let us then march to meet them. Are they, and we, no longer the same men? Soldiers. At Jena against those same Prussians, now so arrogant, you were 1-3, and at Montmirail 1-6. Let those amongst you, who have been captives to the English, describe the nature of their prison ships, and the frightful miseries you endured. The Saxons, the Belgians, the Hanoverians, the soldiers of the Confederation of the Rhine, lament that they are compelled to use their arms in the cause of princes, the enemies of justice, and of the rights of nations. They know that this coalition is insatiable, after having devoured 12 millions of Italians, 1 million of Saxons, and 6 millions of Belgians, it now wishes to devour the states of the second rank in Germany. Madmen! One moment of prosperity has bewildered them, the oppression and humiliation of the French people are beyond their power. If they enter France, they will find their grave. Soldiers! We have forced marches to make, battles to fight, dangers to encounter, but with firmness, victory will be ours. The rights, the honor, and the happiness of the country will be recovered. To every Frenchman who has a heart, the moment is now arrived to conquer or to die. About 4 o'clock in the morning of the 15th of June, Napoleon attacked the Prussian outposts in front of Charleroi, at Thuin and Lobs. The Prussians fell back slowly and with great caution on their supports. By some unaccountable neglect Wellington was not informed of the attack until after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, although the distance from Thuin and Lobs to Brussels is but 45 miles. Had a well-arranged communication been kept up, the Duke could have been informed of the first advance of the French by 10 o'clock in the morning, and of the real line of attack by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The French were in possession of Charleroi by 11 o'clock. The Prussians retreated to a position between Ligny and Street Amand, nearly 20 miles from the outposts. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the 2nd Prussian Corps had taken position near Ligny. Blucher had established his headquarters at Somboeuf. The advanced posts of the French left column were at Franz, 3 miles beyond Quatre Bras, from which the Allied advanced posts had been driven. Ney's headquarters were at Gosselies, with only part of his troops, while Delaun's corps and Kellermann's cavalry were on the Sambre. The center column of the French army was near Fleurus, the right column near Châtelet, and the reserve, composed of the Imperial Guard and the 6th Corps, between Charleroi and Fleurus. The Duke of Wellington, although aware of Napoleon's advance and his attack on the Prussian outposts, would not leave Brussels uncovered until certain of the real line of attack, as such attacks often mask the true direction of the main body of the enemy. However, orders were immediately sent to the different divisions to assemble and be ready to march, some at a moment's notice, and some at daylight in the morning. Lord Uxbridge was ordered to gather the cavalry at headquarters, Ninove, that night, leaving the 2nd Hussars of the King's German Legion on the lookout between the Scheldt and the Lys. The troops in Brussels, composed of the 5th Pictons Division, the 81st Regiment, and the Hanoverian Brigade of the 6th Division, called the Reserve, were to be ready to march at a moment's notice. After the Duke had completed his arrangements for the concentration of the army, he, along with many of our officers, attended the celebrated ball given by the Duchess of Richmond on the eve of the engagement at Quatre Bras, at her residence, now N9, Rue des Sondes, Boulevard Botanique, near the Porte de Cologne. The Duchess's saloons were filled with a brilliant company of distinguished guests. The officers, in their magnificent uniforms, danced with the most lovely and beautiful women. The ball was at its height when the Duke of Wellington first received positive intelligence that Napoleon had crossed the Sambre with his whole army and taken possession of Charleroi. The excitement that ensued among the company upon learning of Napoleon's advance was extraordinary. The countenances, which moments before were lit with pleasure and gaiety, now wore a solemn aspect. The Duke of Brunswick, sitting with a child, the present Prince de Ligny, on his knees, was so affected that he let the prince fall on the floor as he rose. The guests little imagined that the music accompanying the lively dances at the ball would soon play martial airs on the battlefield, or that some of the officers present would be found fighting in their ball dresses, and in that costume, among the slain. At about the same time, His Grace also received information from his outposts in front of Mons and other sources, confirming that the enemy's movement upon Charleroi was the real point of attack. He immediately issued the following orders. Brussels, 15th of June, 1815. After orders. 10 o'clock, p.m. The 5th, Pictons, Division of Infantry, to march on Waterloo at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning. The 3rd, Altons, Division of Infantry, to continue its movement from Braine-le-Comte upon Nivelles. The 1st, Hooks, Division of Infantry, to move from Ongon upon Braine-le-Comte. The 2nd, Clintons, and 4th, Colville's, Divisions of Infantry, to move from Arthen-Gramont, also from Audenarde, and to continue their movements upon Ongon. The cavalry, to continue its movement from Ninove upon Ongon. The above movements to take place with as little delay as possible. Wellington. Picton's division and the Hanoverian Brigade marched from Brussels about 2 o'clock a.m. on the 16th, taking the road to Waterloo through the forest of Soignies, near which they halted to refresh and await orders to march either on Nivelles or Quatre Bras, as the Duke might direct, upon becoming acquainted with the real state of affairs in front. Shortly after, they were joined by the Brunswickers. While halting, the Duke of Wellington, who had left Brussels between 7 and 8 o'clock, passed with his staff and gave strict orders to keep the road clear of baggage and everything that might obstruct the movements of the troops. The Duke of Brunswick dismounted and seated himself on a bank by the roadside with his adjutant general, Colonel Olferman. Those who observed this incident could hardly imagine that within a few hours the illustrious Duke, along with many others, would lie dead. Many were indeed among the slain before the sun set. Around 12 o'clock, orders arrived for the troops to proceed to Quatre Bras, leaving the baggage behind. This looked rather warlike, but nothing was known for certain yet. The Duke galloped on and, after a quick glance at the Waterloo position, rode to Quatre Bras, where he conferred with the Prince of Orange regarding the disposition of the arriving troops. His Grace reconnoitred the enemy's position. Seeing that the latter were not in great force, he rode on to hold a conference with Blucher, whom he found around 1:30 p.m. at the windmill at Bussy, between Ligny and Bry, where by noon, through great activity and exertion, 3 corps of the Prussian army, about 85,000 men, had been positioned, though in a way that drew the Duke's disapproval. His Grace saw that the enemy was strong in Blucher's front and, promising to support his gallant and venerable colleague, shook hands and returned to Quatre Bras, where he arrived around 2:30, soon after which Napoleon began his attack on Blucher. Marshal Ney, commanding the French troops at Quatre Bras, commenced his attack on Poponcha's Dutch-Belgian division under the Prince of Orange. Around 2 o'clock, Picton's division came up, composed of Kemp's brigade, the 28th, 32nd, 79th Highlanders, and 1st Battalion 95th Rifles, and Pack's brigade, the 1st Royal 44th, 42nd, and 92nd Highlanders, along with Best's Hanoverian brigade. Soon after, the incomplete Brunswickers and some Nassau troops arrived. Towards 6 o'clock, Sir Colin Halkett's brigade, the 30th, 33rd, 69th, and 73rd Regiments, as well as Kielmanzedge's Hanoverian brigade, most opportunely reached the scene of action. Pack's troops were by this time so hard-pressed, exhausted, and low on ammunition that Sir Dennis Pack requested a fresh supply of cartridges or assistance from Sir Colin Halkett, who immediately ordered the 69th to push on and obey any orders given by Pack. Pack then galloped forward to a commanding point and soon discovered a large force of cuirassiers preparing for attack. He hurried to prepare his brigade for the coming storm and, while passing by the 69th, ordered Colonel Morris to form a square as the enemy's cavalry was near. The formation was nearly complete when the Prince of Orange rode up and, due to a misunderstanding, directed them to reform the line. They were in the process of doing so when the rushing noise in the high corn announced the arrival of the enemy's cuirassiers, who charged them in flank, rolled them up, and carried off the 69th's colour. Cadet Clark, later a lieutenant in the 42nd, received 23 wounds while defending the colour, one of which left him with a lifelong disability. The Duke of Wellington was nearly captured and owed his escape to an order he promptly gave to part of the 92nd, who were lining a ditch, to lie down while he galloped over them. A little before 7 o'clock, Sir G. Cook's division, composed of the 1st Brigade under Major General Maitland, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 1st Foot Guards, and the 2nd Brigade under Sir J. Byng, now Lord Strafford, composed of the 2nd Battalions of the Coldstream and the 3rd Foot Guards, arrived and soon drove the enemy back. Ney's attacks, initially impetuous, became fewer and feebler as our reinforcements joined, and by sunset, they were conducted with greater caution. Soon after sunset, Ney fell back to France, and the desperate struggle ended. The Duke of Wellington then advanced his victorious troops to the foot of the French position, and both parties deployed piquet for the night. Thus ended the action of Quatre Bras, during which our troops were fully engaged, preventing the Duke from assisting the Prussians as promised. It was only through the greatest personal exertions of our gallant chief and the most determined resistance by his troops that the enemy's attacks were repulsed and our communication with Blucher at Ligny via the Namur road was kept open. The Emperor's instructions to Ney to drive back the English, whom he believed were in small numbers, and then to envelop the Prussian right flank, were completely frustrated. Our force in the field towards the end of the day was about 29,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry, and 68 guns. That of the enemy was about 16,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, with 50 guns. The fortunate circumstance of the marching and countermarching of Delaun's corps, Ney's reserve, between Franz, Ligny, and Quatre Bras without engaging in battle likely contributed to our success on the 16th. An additional force of 25,000 men at either Ligny or Quatre Bras might have secured Napoleon a decisive victory. The action at Quatre Bras possessed its own peculiar and important merits, which, along with our masterly retreat to the Waterloo position, would have been celebrated but for the glorious achievement that followed on the field of Waterloo. In no battle did the British infantry display more valour or more cool, determined courage than at Quatre Bras. We had no cavalry capable of withstanding the shock of the French. The Brunswick and Belgian cavalry attempted but were scattered by the veteran cuirassiers, who had been mounted on horses taken from gendarmes throughout France. The British cavalry had a long march, some nearly 40 miles, and did not arrive until the battle was over. The gallant Picton, seeing the cavalry driven back, led our infantry in squares into the centre of the enemy's masses of cavalry. They faced the charging squadrons with squares and the heavy columns of infantry with line formations. What may not be achieved by such troops, led by such a general? The Duke of Brunswick fell while rallying one of his regiments that had given way. Colonel Sir Robert Macara of the 42nd and Colonel Cameron of the 92nd were also killed. During our struggle at Quatre Bras, Napoleon had attacked the Prussians at Ligny, and between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening, their centre was broken, and they began a retreat upon Wavre. Marshal Blucher's horse, a beautiful grey charger presented to him by our Prince Regent in 1814, was shot under him, and while lying on the ground, the field marshal was twice charged over by the enemy's cavalry. Sir Henry Hardinge, attached to the Prussian headquarters, lost his left hand at Ligny. About 8,000 Prussians deserted and returned home. The Battle of Ligny may be considered a series of village fights, and had the impetuous old Hussar, the gallant Blucher, then 73 years old, not withdrawn troops from his centre to strengthen his right and to enable him to attack the enemy's left, he might have maintained his position. However, once Napoleon perceived that Blucher had weakened his centre, he made a decisive attack, forced it, and thus gained the victory. Despite their defeat, the Prussians distinguished themselves with their audacity and valour. The Battle of Ligny was a fierce and bloody contest, with little or no quarter given by either side. Both parties were driven by deadly animosity, and the helpless wounded became victims. The Prussian loss was about 15,000 men and 25 guns, excluding the 8,000 who disbanded. The French loss was somewhat less. This concludes the first part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.